Dave and Susan Gerke were asking about the different percentages of the different wines. So kind of just as an overview, I'm trying to think, I have them written on here, I think, to help me remember. But the 2010 included, I don't have the 11 open, through 2014, it's a pretty similar percent of like Syrah dominant with, well, actually I think the 14 has a lot less Syrah, but Syrah dominant with Mourvèdre, Grenache, and Petite Syrah. Anywhere from like, 6 or 7% up to 12%. So just kind of the petite adding a little bit in there. And normally it's Paderewski dominant, vineyard dominant. But in 14, I believe that was Catapult dominant, and that had to do with the vintage. And in 15, the vintage was just so different than the other ones. So if we're talking 12 through 15, 12, 13, and 14 were all really warm vintages, and then we were hit with 15, which we thought was going to be similar to them, but it ended up being really different. And that one has actually 14% Petite Syrah, and it's kind of paving the way. So after 15, we're adding a lot more Petite Syrah to the wines. And actually by 2017, the wine is Petite Syrah dominant. So it's kind of a flip, but we're working there because I think Petite Syrah has become more popular, and I'm using it sort of as a way for people to delineate and understand the wine more. And I think it's easier for them if they're not like, here's my Syrah blend, here's my Syrah blend, here's my Syrah blend. Well, here's my Petite Syrah rum blend. And that coincided with vineyard age with us, like the Petite Syrah vines becoming old enough that they were producing the wines that could make it dominant in this wine. So that's that about
the pulling like in warmer vintages. Are you pulling more from Paderewski, and then cooler vintages? Are you pulling more from Catapult, or is it just like?
It's just like this. Paderewski has 65 acres, Catapult has 30, and it just depends what makes it into that blend that year. So just depending on the year, it might weigh more because it's a pretty big blend to one vineyard than the other. But the Petite Syrah is always coming from Paderewski because we don't have it planted at Catapult. But 14, that was an interesting year. It was just a really warm year, and just the way that, it all kind of laid out, it ended up being Catapult dominant. But, you never really know going in. Yeah, so I feel like hopefully to you guys, the wine's personality seems really consistent, but the vintage is sort of that sort of special flair that makes everything a little different. So if you were to do a vertical, you understand the personality of the wine, but you see the differences in the vintage, which is really important to me. I love honoring the vintage and the site.
So when doing your blends, are you separating everything out by block within each vineyard site?
Yeah. So when we pick, when we're harvesting, is that what you're asking? So we harvest. So that's a really good question. So we usually harvest per block, not even a whole block at once, like a portion of that block that's ripe at the right time. So that allows us to stay on top of the ripeness and not pick something when it's too ripe. So I want to pick right at the beginning of ripeness. If I start to pick when it's too ripe, the wines become too heavy. And so I'm really careful about I'm in the vineyard all the time, tasting, dividing it up. With the Ingenuity and some of our other wines, but Ingenuity in particular, the base of this wine is one fermentation that is co-fermentation of Syrah, Grenache, Mourvèdre, and Petite Syrah. Because we have different aspects of the vineyard planted to all these different varieties, I find a 4-ton pick of all the different grapes, and I ferment them together, and it becomes the base of this wine. So that's how I start to build the blend, is with that.
Is that the same base every year then?
It is the same base. I always start with, I call it Sugar Puss, because it's Syrah, Grenache, Petite Syrah, and sometimes it has Mourvèdre in it too, sometimes it doesn't. But that just starts at the beginning, and I always build my blend in a blind fashion, so I add other components to it and see if it works and see if it doesn't. So I was going to show you guys.
Cool way to do that too.
Yeah, it just came, I started it, I think in 2012, maybe 11 or 12, and I just kept using that. I was going to show you guys a picture of Paderewski right now. Hopefully, do you guys see that? I'm going to pull it up so you can see the whole vineyard right now. So this is the Paderewski vineyard, and the Petite Syrah block, I want to make sure I get this right, is right, oh, I've got the chat box in the way, is right here. You guys see that? That's where our Petite Syrah block, the initial one was. Can you see that, Zach?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and then can you see the pointer?
Yeah.
Okay, and then still learning Zoom, so thanks. And this is our younger Petite Syrah block, but it's already 12 plus years old. But this was the other one that wasn't there when wasn't producing when I first started at Epoch. So
but now you're pulling fruit from there now as well?
Yes, we're pulling fruit from both. And you can sort of see at Paderewski, there's this undulating character to the terrain. And they're kind of like these fingers coming down, and they're actually pointing south. And so you can kind of see, like, over here is the east, and this is the west, and this is the north. So exposure is really important when we are matching grape variety and rootstock to the site. So whether it's east facing and much cooler, or west facing and much warmer, as you can see, the Petite Syrah can handle the hotter sun in the afternoon, and that's why it's planted on these warmer slopes. Plus, we need a little bit more heat to develop that tannin. We don't want it to be undeveloped. So Randy Smith asks, hey, Jordan, do I pick on grapes or more on taste and look at the vines and grapes? Yes, I pick on taste. I mean, with all the little blobs, I can't keep up with what's going on in my palate in the vineyard on a daily basis, because I've got to stay, my brain's got to stay several days ahead of what is happening that day. And then also I'm looking at the weather. So like a hot day in August and September, when you're already like just nearing on ripeness, can change the game. So I would say it's flavor, and it's weather, and it's the way the grapes are holding up. And then bricks are kind of secondary to that, because that's really a vintage thing. The acidity and the bricks are really related to the vintage. Okay, and so Dan Kozo asks, will York Mountain fruit make it into Ingenuity? Potentially, yes. So we can include, so York Mountain is actually where the winery is, and it's our third vineyard, our third estate vineyard. So we got Paderewski, Catapult, and York. York, we planted in 2015, but it was originally planted by the York family, just like Paderewski had been planted many years ago by Paderewski. And this is a different AVA than Paso. However, as long as we're under 15% York Mountain fruit, we can include it into Ingenuity and still call Ingenuity Paso Robles. So we can talk about that offline. That's kind of like a bunch of compliance. Yeah, let's talk about, I do think, to the Duns, I think the 16 Ingenuity, last time I tasted it, definitely needed some time. So you can tell me, you can pull the cork and let me know, but that vintage, there's a lot of tannin going on in that one. It's really fresh. It's gonna be really beautiful. It just might need a little bit of time, but I need to check in on it. I definitely do. Like I said, I sort of avoid the younger vintages, and I angle towards the older ones. I spend so much time with the young vintages when they're in the winery, and then I just put them to bed. So I'm gonna move from here to show you a picture of Catapult really quick, because I did Paderewski, and this one was taken yesterday. Oh wait, that's not the right one, is it? Did I have it on the right one on there? Sorry. And sorry, I'm still like figuring this out. Here we go. You guys see Catapult Vineyard there? It's really green and lush. And this is a cool vineyard in the sense, because look at it's two hillsides. It's two complete hillsides with the 360-degree aspects to all the blocks. So, you know, you've got north, you've got south, you've got northwest, west, southwest, west. So it's like matching all of that stuff is really fun. You don't always hit the nail on the head, but you try to do the best you can. So you can see how green it is. You can almost see the block changes in here too. Definitely here and here. There's about, how many different blocks? There's 6 different blocks going across this west. This is Niner, for those of you who've been to Paso. And then we got Booker over here. and Eagle Castle on the lower part of the screen. So just a fun little image to keep you guys entertained.
I think it's important to like always think about, like, I mean, for everyone that hasn't been to Paso, I mean, those are essentially Grand Cru sites, you know? I mean, those are like some of the best vineyard sites, I would say, even in California. I mean, they are producing unbelievable wines, and the wines are only getting better as the vines are getting older. And a lot of them are, you know, I mean, you do like head trained and then some trellis vines as well throughout.
Right. So when we first planted Paderewski, you kind of go, I mean, it's like this whole evolution. You can always look at the evolution of California wine or wine in general with when the vineyard was planted. So when Paderewski was planted, VSP was the gospel. So that's vertical shoot position vine. So that's where you train the vine up. It has a trunk, and you train it either one direction or you train it both directions, and then it's spur pruned. So you have these little fingers come up that you cut down back to 2 spurs every year, and then they grow 2 shoots. And so everything is in this nice line. You have catch wires, and it's beautiful. That was developed, I believe, I haven't looked at the history, but it makes sense to me to think it was developed for the Bordelais, because they have a much wetter climate. They need to control their vines because the vines grow like crazy. They need to get sunshine into the fruit. When you look back at what they planted in warmer areas way back in the day, i.e. California back in the late 1800s, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Spain, you know, all these places, Bandol, Southwest France, they're all head trained. And that's because with a head trained vine, in these areas, it's less vigorous, less rain, not as much canopy. And you get the 360-degree protection of your fruit by doing a head trained vine that isn't trained out on a wire. So as I move forward at Epoch over the years and looking at the quality of the sun and what the fruit was doing, I realized on the VSP trained stuff, even though it's such a wonderful and easy way to take care of the vine wants to set more fruit sort of by its head, at least the Rhone varieties do. So I started to get interested in looking at head trained. So I started a few blocks at Paderewski that were head trained. And then we planted York, and we did a combination of both, because York is actually a cooler site with a little more rainfall. So you kind of think, I'm not really sure which one's going to work here because I'm on the Central Coast, but I'm cooler and I get more rainfall. And then we actually planted an extension to Paderewski where we're all head trained. So again, it's that 360-degree protection, the desire to ask less of each vine because you're not asking it to grow and produce that much fruit, because I don't want to use that much water. I don't want to add nutrients. I want to use what's in the soil to really help promote specificity of site. So that's where we're at now. We'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't know. That's like the flavor. I don't want to call it the flavor of this era of viticulture because it's looking to the past, right?
Yeah, which is so crazy because it is kind of like, I mean, people are like, yeah, this is kind of the new trend, but it's really, it's going back to the basics, you know, it's going back to just giving the earth what it needs, and in turn the earth gives back, and you're able to produce amazing fruit. And
yeah, there's always a twist on it. It's like using concrete in the winery. So, you know, or amphora, large foudre, large format barrels. So the twist is that we're doing it old school way, but we're tighter spacing, but we are still able, we hand farm everything, but we're able to drive the tractor through. So it's kind of like all these things that come together that make sense for right now. So the results so far have been great. I will say that when you're training out on the wire, like in the VSP, you're kind of forcing this vine into submission at a younger age, which some people argue isn't, like if you talk to Guillaume from Clos Solène, he wants to and I totally agree with it, like let the vine be young and let it grow, and then, kind of force it into submission later and don't expect too much of it young. But a lot of people plant a vineyard and they want to make awesome wine because of all the money they put in, right? I want like my third leaf, which is actually 2 years in the ground. Like I want great wine out of this. And come on, I mean, yes, you can get good wine, and especially if you're in a good site, but like don't expect the world in the first vintage. Like you just can't, because young vine wine tastes like young wine.
Yeah.
If it's great, you are just in for an awesome you picked the right site.
Yeah,
But just don't judge it too much at that moment. So, yeah. So, okay. So I want to we can talk about the wines a little bit. I sort of laid it out for the vintage. I want to hear what Zack thinks about the 13 and the 15. And then you guys can post some questions about those individually. I know I got one on the different varietals. I saw Dan ask about co-ferment. I did say like the Ingenuity definitely has co-ferments in it. It has the Syrah Grenache Petite as the base. A lot of times I'll ferment Grenache and Mourvedre together. Why do I co-ferment? The variety that you're adding brings something to the variety that you were picking that it maybe didn't have. Maybe it brings acidity, maybe it brings tannin, maybe it brings a different flavor component. Kind of the same idea of doing whole cluster versus not, maybe adding tannin where it is needed. So I like to co-ferment. It's like blending from a really, really early stage with even more integration than is possible through blending. So.
Yeah, I mean, and that's pretty traditional with like Rhone blends. I mean, a lot of people are still co-fermenting. And I think there is a certain art to that as much as there is actually blending, but you know, you get a sense of that vineyard site or those vineyard sites when you are co-fermenting. And you know, I always like that because you really get a sense of place when you do that. So it's always pretty fun.
Yeah, I know that, so Justin Smith at Saxum and then Chuck Faruya, who's a master sommelier who kind of a mentor to Zack, is an amazing guy. They're both talking about when do we stop talking about like varieties, but actually just vineyard sites. And again, it's like looking to the past because that's what Châteauneuf-du-Pape did. If you think about Bordeaux back in the day before Cabernet just became king and everyone wanted to plant so much percentage Cabernet to make Cabernet dominant, like they had other varieties there, you know, because it's not that Cab's going to match to every, you saw how Catapult looks and the two circles, the hillsides that have all the aspects, like a different, you know, Merlot and Cab Franc or whatever, if we were doing Cab or Bordeaux grapes would have maybe been better in a different aspect.
I'm going to see if Chuck can jump on.
Oh gosh. See if he'll come on. Chuck's amazing. We'll unmute him because you guys should all meet him. There's a group of, this small group of master sommeliers that were Fred Dame. They were all his buddies, and Fred Dame brought Master Somm certification to the United States, and that was his first group.
Yeah, Nunzio and Madeline Trifon, who's amazing. Madeline's my girl. She's like top notch.
She's in Detroit, right?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I know, and she was like, you know, she was eating everyone because we did that morning at Petarowski, and it was out of this world, and she was just drinking the Kool-Aid hard, like just loving every little bit of it.
Yeah, so Zach's talking about in January we have an event called Wine Speak, which brings wine people from all over the world. It can be consumers, sommeliers, restaurant owners, winemakers, whoever it might be, to pass the rules, and it just puts everybody in the same room. And so it's not just about Rhone variety grapes like Hospice de Rhone. It's everything that's going on in Paso, and it's just a really great time to exchange. Look at this light on. Okay, there we go. Anyway, so yeah, thoughts on the 13 and the 15 that you have, Zach?
I think right off the bat, I mean, the amount of life that the 13 has is something that you don't see very often in Paso Rhone blends. Like I said before, I think a lot of these wines come out of the gate drinking, you know, big and opulent and beautiful. But I mean, drinking these wines together, I mean, you really get a sense of the ageability and how much longer the 13 can age too. I mean, if anybody has 13 and they're worried if they should drink it or not, like, hold that wine down. I would personally love to see where this wine is in like even 10 to 15 years. I mean, I think this would still be holding up or just producing some flavors that you don't get as much, a lot more of those secondary qualities, a little bit more of that kind of like turned earth and those chocolate characteristics, a little bit of that cured meat. I think that comes through. I think a lot of people, especially for new world Rhone blends, push more towards their fruit components. Which is great. I mean, I think that appeals to a lot of like American wine drinkers. You know, we love our Coca-Cola and our Pepsi and our sodas, so they want something that has that intensity. But at the same time, for me, and I think the general public is moving that way. Like we want those secondary qualities. We want something that sticks out. We want a little bit of that barbecue smoke, that kind of that cured meat, that black pepper, that turned earth. A little bit of like stemmy greenness isn't always a bad thing. I mean, you do a certain amount of whole cluster that I know changes here and there, but yeah, I think, you know, I think that's important. And I think a lot of people, you're seeing a lot more people do that. They're not going for these massive fruit bombs that are the same vintage after vintage. And I think for me, that's always what's fun. I know in comparison, the 13 it's slightly more reserved now. And I think that has a lot to do with it, like just the age in general, and the vintage overall.
Yeah, so it's funny because I just did this tasting with some people, virtually, of course, with the 13 and 14 inch, or Veracity, sorry. And we held them both, they were both blind. So we mixed them up and we all did them blind. And even me, all of us, I spent the entire tasting thinking that the 14 was the 13, because those vintages were similar. We were in the drought, and they were early harvest, early bud break, early harvest. You know, we could look at the growing degree days and all the rainfall and all that stuff, but they were very similar. And we all thought that the 13 was the 14. At the end, when I went last, and after I saw everybody was wrong, I started to notice like this slight bit of an older character on the 13. And that was after, you know, 2 hours, that was the only thing that showed me that that was my only cue, and the fact that everyone was wrong. So I think the wine is just so fresh, and I see a lot of people writing that they think the 13 is tasting amazing, and I totally agree. It was actually most people's favorite. Everyone thought they were like the 14 more, but they actually liked the 13. And you know, wines are alive, and we don't filter, so they're constantly evolving and changing. So one moment, you know, the 14 might be tasting great, and then it kind of goes into this reductive or closed phase, and then it needs to come out of it again. So the older the wine is, the more that you don't run that risk of, you know, having it be in kind of a phase where it's not as open, but it still happens.
I mean, I opened both these wines up 4 or 5 hours ago. So, I mean, they've definitely had time to breathe. And the reason I did that is so I really am able to kind of notice the differences between them. And it does slowly become clear, because the 13, you do start to lose a little bit of that bright fruit. The fruit does seem a little, not cooked, but a little bit more almost like baked. You get that kind of like fruity pie kind of quality. And, you know, there's a little bit of that gun smoke that comes through. And I think those secondary qualities, that adds that complexity and it adds that depth, which a lot of people are looking for. But the 15 still has it. I mean, the 15 across the board is still so bright and so lively and so lifted overall. I mean, there's so much energy behind it. And I think that is something that makes it, you know, easy to pair with food. It's not going to overpower anything. I told you before, I think, you know, a lot of people are doing these Rhone blends. Not going to name any particular winery, but these Rhone blends that are like the Russian imperial stouts of wines that, you know, it's hard to think about drinking them with food. It's like the end of the night kind of bottle, and you have one bottle, that's it.
I always think like too, you know, I mean, we all love, scores are great when they're great. You can use them, but after people are established, they're not as important, but they're there as a reference, and all the wine drinkers can follow the critics that they agree with their palate. I think that's a great thing, because they're critics, right? They're like restaurant critics. We just have to remember that. But it's different when you have a little bit of wine in your glass versus a whole glass poured, and how the wine feels and how it evolves. Those are all things that I think about all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I always say too, I mean, I always do this, but whenever your glass is empty, like go back to it and smell your empty glass, and there's so much more comes out of it. Like you get these secondary characteristics that you don't normally think about, that you know, these aromatics are coming out, and it's really nice, you know. I mean, for me, like whenever doing blind tasting, if I ever finish my wine, I always go back to it at the end if it's empty, because sometimes that'll give me the one little note that'll separate, you know, Southern Rhone from Northern Rhone. And it's like, oh, this is primarily Grenache. You're getting more of this like white pepper quality, and it's less black pepper. You're getting slightly more red plum to the black plum. And I think those things are always like making a difference.
Totally. If you're taking your Somm exam, I think I saw people in the Somm movie doing that too, when the glass was empty. I never thought about that. I'm always like, you know,
Yeah.
I need to refill
Oh,
it.
it's so much fun. I mean, sometimes too, I mean, we've done, I was drinking some Gigondas recently, and it's like, you know, Gigondas sits right next to Chateauneuf du Pape. It's really affordable. And, you know, it's that Southern Rhone blend. And, you know, there's so much fruit to this one producer that I was having. And it was hard for me to even think that, like, is this more new world or old world? But once the wine was gone, and it's like, go back to the glass, and it's just so meaty. You get so much like leather and smoke, and like the peppery qualities come out, and it's got this like almost like animalistic quality to it that's just so fun. And you don't get as much of that on the nose as you would on the palate, which you know, helps separate it. It's what makes these wines exciting.
Totally. I love that. And I think like people are commenting on and I do think it comes out in the empty glass, how the 15 Ingenuity has more, they seem like they can tell there's more red. Red is like that funky, earthy, like that's what we all associate. Syrah has it too in that reductive form. And I think that's showing you that vintage. It's the wine's still really fresh. I love reductive wines when it's that good reduction. And to me, that's that good reduction. So it's that play between, you know, the smoky, meaty, earthy, mushroomy, and you've got the Morvet and the Syrah kind of playing. And that will continue to push and pull. Chuck Faria is on. Thanks,
Yeah,
Chuck.
perfect.
We got the Master Somm on here now. He's on his phone. So anyway, I want to share the screen with you before it gets too late of the impressions. I didn't even tell Zach was going to do this, but can you guys see that?
This is nobody does this.
This is just a me thing, and it's kind of weird. And whenever I have to do them, because it's such a mental game, I question why I'm doing it. But I love putting them together. So here's all the different vintages: 12, 13, 14, 15. And I feel that you can tell there's a similarity in the blend there. And I don't go back and look at the previous vintages impression when I draw the new one. I just draw it. I kind of try to do it blind that way. And I draw it over several sittings, and hopefully when I piece them together, because I do so many drawings, like I look back and I say, oh, the first one I drew actually looks like the one I was my final. But I love thinking, like looking at the 12, and I said this to Zach earlier, but I've told so many people that the 12s were kind of donut wines when they were young. They had an entry and a finish, but they were, you couldn't tell what was happening in the middle when they were young. The 12 is filled out so much. I don't know who's drinking it right now, but I haven't opened this wine in a really long time. It wasn't one of my favorite vintages, but I'm loving the 12 now. It's still so fresh. I use a lot of whole cluster, and you can kind of see it at release how I had like an entry and then a finish, but it was very linear in the middle. And now it's developed and become more full. So I love that. You can kind of see the intricacy, but how of the wines across the vintages. Anyway, I love them in series when I do the impressions, and you can put them all up against each other. Hopefully you agree. I don't know.
I agree. I totally agree. No, it's cool. I mean, nobody really does it in that. I mean, eventually it's important to kind of think about tasting that way. I mean, it puts things in perspective, and it puts things in perspective, I think, for you as a winemaker. It's like, you know, this is what you want. This is how you want your wine to taste, and how important structure is. Because I mean, that's like,
yeah, and structure is really, so the reason why I draw is I visualize it, but I started making Cabernet in Sonoma County in a cooler climate than Napa, but we were trying to compete with Napa. And so it's all about texture at that point, because if you have too much tannin, you're not competing with Napa Cab. So it's so texturally based. If you do everything right in the winery, the aromatics come, all of the flavors are there. I'm not trying to manipulate those. I'm really looking at texture. And so you can't describe texture with words. Maybe cotton ball, and you can do a little bit, but you can't tell where it's hitting on your palate, and that's why I draw them.
Would you say that some of this comes from your engineering degree?
I think so. So if you guys, as I studied engineering and art when I was an undergrad, but I started putting them on the newer impressions, but I started putting the 4-part quadrant. And so that's where it gets back to sort of like the engineering part, where it's not all just like an artistic thing. It's like really talking about, okay, this is how it feels when the wine enters the front of the palate, the top of the palate in the front, the bottom of the palate in the front, as it moves across. This is what I'm experiencing at the end. A lot of times, I mean, this is when I started dating them, because I know that the wines become more forgiving with tannin as they age. And I always say, like, a lot of the baby fat falls away too. So you kind of get like more minerality coming through, more earthiness, but just like you kind of get this, at a certain point, you'll get a better impression of the texture of the wine when the baby fat falls away, but then you'll start to get all the secondary and tertiary things that are happening that are actually making the wine softer. And then they're delicious, but they're maybe changing that pure sensation. So you really have to like be at the right moment.
Yeah. And I always use the kind of growing up as human beings analogy. So I love the baby fat thing, but it is, I mean, as wines age, you slowly start developing more personality, really is what it is, you know? These little things that add another aspect of this wine's personality and make it more mature, you know? And we say these things, and I know people who aren't in the wine industry kind of shake their head and they're just like, what are you talking about? But as you know, oh, Chuck.
Oh, is that Chuck? There's Chuck. Let's let Chuck talk. Hi, Chuck.
Hi.
We're not letting anyone else talk, but we're letting you talk because you're a master somm.
Check this out, man.
I'm going to stop the screen share. Hold on. Wow.
Yeah. So I want to just say something that I didn't know how to work this thing, so I'm just jumping in now. But I want to say this. You know, I've been around and experienced Paso Robles for a long time. And of course, you know, you have the more showy examples like Saxum and Lina Coloto and whatnot, you know. Epoch has come on so strong, especially recently. I mean, oh my goodness. And you guys are having the 13 and the 15. And my comment to everybody that's listening, there's a huge opportunity that lies between Pinot Noir and Cabernet Sauvignon. And the Epoch wines are perfectly produced to fill that gap. And so therefore they can have the elegance and suavability of Pinot Noir with the mojo and the oomph that Cabernet can provide. Epoch can fill those holes with many of their different cuvées. But the other thing I want to comment on regarding Epoch, just so everybody understands, when these Paso Robles wines first come on, when they're first released, you know, it's a hot region, so they have all this fruit, and it's ripe, and it's visceral, and it's, you know, there's a lot of flavor. And Zack talked about gigondas, and those are stones mainly. You know, there's some sand and there's some limestone, but overall they're stones. Those stones create a real savoriness in the wines. Whereas if you look at Epoch, specifically Paderewski and Catapult, you're going to see more siliceous clay, limestone / marine soils. It creates a completely different minerality. It creates a very different minerality that's very uplifting, and it creates buoyancy. And when you experience them with 2013, which is like 7 years old, where you got cherries and all this savory ripe fruit and everything, the minerality comes singing through. I mean, it's glorious, and it's so uplifting, interesting, and it creates buoyancy in the wine. It makes the wine seem less heavy than they are. Jordan mentioned the 2012. If you taste the 2012 Ingenuity right now, you're going to taste an example of what Paso Robles can be, and specifically Epoch and Paderewski and Catapult. It's something that is very unique to Paso Robles, unique to California, and deserves more attention than it gets. Forget the scores for a second. People don't understand how underrated these Epoch wines are. And then the last thing I want to say is, you know, I'm discovering more and more, all vineyards in Paso Robles are not the same. When I first went to Paderewski, when they were clearing the land, the biggest difference I saw from all the other vineyards that I visit and walk throughout Paso Robles, if you look at the slant of the siliceous clay, limestone, whatever you want to call it, the marine soils, it's at a diagonal. Whereas Denner is more, what do you call it? L'Aventure is more horizontal. So this slant of the soils, the undersoils, allows the roots to go down deeper, quicker, easier, in search of nutrients, water, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's why the Epoch wines, specifically when they have high percentages of Paderewski, you know, you have this whole nother dimension of minerality that a lot of the other wineries don't have. And certainly the wineries from outside of Paso Robles. So you have this combination of minerality, which the 12 and the 13 are beginning to really show their peacock feathers right now. Epic. And then the 2012, as Jordan had noted, also has had a chance to resolve itself. And that's the point, whether it's Barolo, Bordeaux, or it's Amarone. You got to give wines a time to resolve all the different parts of it and see what it's made of. So 2012 had a beginning, had a finish, but the middle was kind of murky. Now you try to 2012, everything's filled out. Oh my goodness, it's glorious. And that's the point, is that not all wines are created equal. Not all Paso Robles wines are created. And the two wines that you're trying from Epoch should hopefully show you that these aren't like anything else, and they deserve more and more attention. You know, whether you're a collector or whether you're just a wine enjoyer, you know, these wines are something to behold. That's what I want to tell you guys. Texturally, balance, everything, Jordan. You've done a terrific job being the winemaker of such an incredible winery, which I think is certainly one of the best out of Paso Robles and certainly one of the best out of California and the New World.
I love you, Chuck. You're amazing. Thank you so much for your insight.
Oh, I mean it. Fun to say that.
So good to see you.
Yeah.
So awesome.
You know, in addition to winemaker, you're also this incredible kindred spirit that, oh my God, all the things that you do and how you help everybody and have words of wisdom for the young generation. And I know Paso Robles, the winemaking community is a close knit, but I think you're one of the leaders, and deservedly so. You lead by example. So congratulations, girlfriend.
Thank you so much. Mahalo. I wish I was with you.
I know. I'm at Sunset Beach visiting my grandkids.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. You guys, Chuck is just a wealth of wine knowledge. And I always learn so much when I talk to him.
Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you for tuning in.
Aloha.
Aloha. Totally the aloha spirit. I feel complete now. So you guys have been asking a lot, and I'm going to wrap up because I know we're about at an hour, about our gratitude wine. I don't even think Zach knows about this.
I do know about this. I think this is so cool. I was actually going to ask you about this.
A lot of people have asked, and I'm going to make the official announcement now, and then you guys will see it on social media, and then it'll start going on. But Epoch really wants to do something to say thank you to our frontline workers risking their lives every day during this pandemic. And you know, at first we were thinking like, what can we do? What can we do? And then we also have this really special international wine that we were able to make in 2018. And I think Liz Armstrong she had the idea a couple of months ago when all of this was starting, maybe 6 weeks ago, that we were able to use this special international wine that we made to honor our first responders and do something to give back. So in 2018, I was able to go to the Barossa Valley to visit Michael Twelfth Tree at Two Hands during his harvest. And he's a good friend of Bill Armstrong's. They're buddies from Hospice du Rhône, and we've always just, you know, exchanged emails and talked about winemaking. So I thought it's the total opposite vintage of us. I'll just go for a little bit and experience it. Wasn't expecting anything. He's just brought me out to this Grenache vineyard. He said, I love your Grenaches. Here, you can have a ton of this. It was Old Vine Vineyard in Barossa Valley. So beautiful, the most beautiful fruit that I saw the whole time I was there. So I was able to crush that fruit, determine the winemaking practices, start the fermentation, and then I had to come home. They finished the wine, sent it on a United Airlines plane to LAX, where we had it picked up, brought to Epoch, and we did the élevage and the barrel aging, and we bottled it. We weren't sure what to do with this wine because it's completely different than any of the wines we've made at Epoch before, but we really loved the idea of it. We loved the wine, we loved the Grenache. And so when all this came to be, we thought, well, let's use this wine as a way to say thank you. So what we're doing is we are, starting June 1st, we are gonna donate a third of it to our local first responders, healthcare workers, people on the front lines of this pandemic. Then the other 2/3, we're offering you guys the ability to purchase it at $40 a bottle and gift it to anybody in your area that you feel is worthy. So it is called Gratitude, and it just expresses how grateful we are, to be in the industry we're in, for things that, people that are doing what we could not do every day to save everyone that we love. So hopefully you guys, you can also purchase it to taste, which I totally recommend doing because it's a really fantastic wine, and it's really fun to taste Grenache from the Barossa versus that from Paso Robles versus from other areas. And that is Gratitude. So, and I'm grateful to all of you for being here.
Yeah, that's awesome, Jordan. So cool that you're doing that, honestly.
Thank you. And we'll have more details about the wine as it comes out. I'm still putting all my notes together, watching it age. Oh yes, and then for the, Liz just pointed out, I forgot to mention this. So for all the bottles that we sell, all the proceeds are gonna go to certain charities that are dealing with people who are affected by COVID. So we're still working out who those will be. I guess it'll depend on like the outreach and which charities we find that are really making a difference. And once we sell the wine, we'll be able to donate to them. So yeah, so it's all, and Michael Tweltree is totally on board. He's super excited about, and it, because this pandemic is involving all of us, it just makes sense to use this global wine for that purpose. So yeah, that was a mouthful. We have a much more succinct way of explaining it online and on social media. But it's a special wine to me and a special relationship we have with Two Hands. So
cool. And they do their whole like garden series, which is awesome too, where they're like focusing on like Lily's garden and like those single sub appellations essentially. Yeah, I love those wines.
So cool, such an interesting area. And then Michael has his own sort of 12 tree labels that is all Grenache, which is very small production. And so we just totally geeked out about Grenache in general. And so it was really fun to have this, we're still having the back and forth of the wine ages, but it was just really cool. And I would say the Barossa, the wines taste different and people drive on the other side of the road, but it wasn't that different in my mind as like, when you're in Italy or when you're in France, like things are really different over there. Australia's cool. It's, you can picture yourself living there. Like, so I hope you guys enjoyed this evening. I really appreciate you tuning in. I mean, there's a lot of Zoom tastings going on, and you probably have to pick and choose what you want to do. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it as well.
Great to see you, and thanks for getting Chuck to come on. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and read everyone's comments, and if I didn't get to someone's question and I have your email address, I will reach out to you because there's just so much for an hour. But thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Zach, I'll be in touch too. We'll text.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. I'll reach out soon.
Okay, everyone be safe and well. Thanks again.
Awesome. Aloha, everybody.